Hi, I'm your Howard County Executive, Calvin Ball, and you're tuned into Mako's Conduit Street Podcast. Whether you're a Maryland resident, a government official, or just someone interested in learning more about public policy in Maryland, this podcast is for you.
Hello and welcome to the Conduit Street Podcast. Kevin Kinnally here with Michael Sanderson. Michael Sanderson, we are in the Mako office today recording live, and we have a very special guest.
Yeah, it's good to be back in the studios. A beautiful day in Annapolis and a great day for our guest.
And we are very excited to have a special guest with us today, Maryland's 34th Comptroller and first female Chief Financial Officer in the state of Maryland, Brooke Lierman. Comptroller Lierman, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So, Madam Comptroller, again, we're very glad to have you join us today. Our audience on the podcast are mostly fans of Maryland policy and politics, so you are a well-known name to many of them, but let's be listener-friendly and start with a softball. Tell us the role of the Maryland Comptroller and what got you interested in seeking that statewide office.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me, and that is a great first question. I have learned in my first year, the Maryland Comptroller is really unique in state politics across the country. Nobody else quite has my job description. And really, the Comptroller of Maryland, created in the early 1850s, serves as the elected CFO of the state of Maryland. I see every dollar in and every dollar out of the state, serve on numerous financial and fiscal boards. I am also the revenue administrator of the state, which is a nicer way of saying tax collector.
Sure.
Although I am also the tax refunder, I would like to remind your listeners. And we do a whole host of play a whole host of different roles in terms of financial responsibility, understanding our revenues, helping oversee our pension system with the treasurer, serving on the Board of Public Works, and then serving on numerous other boards as well.
Got it. So a number of states have different titles that are at least part of your composite role here. There are revenue officers. Some of them are elected. Some of them are appointed. It's all over the map, it sounds like. So
it is.
We are one of a kind here. And I noticed that you go out of your way to use the Maryland-favored pronunciation of comptroller and emphasizing the first syllable and the MP, where I think much of the world uses this word to say controller in some sort of a British phrasing. But you've made you're down for the Maryland framing here.
Well, right? I am all about the Maryland phrasing. Hey, it's say every letter, right?
Right.
Absolutely.
Comptroller. Yes. So, since my job description of one of a kind, might as well use the pronunciation in a one of a kind way.
In addition to the formal duties as the revenue administrator and so forth, you also serve on the state's Board of Public Works. And we put some time and effort into that. You have advocated for a number of changes there, but why don't you walk through for a minute for our listeners, what is the Board of Public Works and what's your role as a member there?
Sure, absolutely. It is interesting to go to other states and I try to explain to them, what my role entails. And I try to explain the Board of Public Works and people look at me like, what is that? And why do you have it? Right. But it is an incredibly important body in the state of Maryland because, as you said, it helps oversee the procurement of the state. So the Board of Public Works is ultimately responsible for approving or denying almost every contract of $200,000 or more that the state enters into. It's also responsible for approving all wetlands licenses, which as a coastal state, there are many of them, and any capital grant or loan. So money that is going, from our capital budget to nonprofits, foundations all over the state. And so we generally review about $400 million in contracts every month. We meet just about every other Wednesday at 10 a.m. You can catch us on YouTube. But that is in itself, of course, a great amount of work because as an independently elected statewide official, I take my job to be an independent voice, like looking out for the best value for Maryland taxpayers very seriously. So I have a Board of Public Works director who serves in our Office of Policy, Public Works, and Investment. And she and I work closely together. She has a couple team members who help us go through what the agencies are bringing. We have long conversations with the agencies about everything from are they reaching their minority business enterprise goals to the climate resilience of the contracts they're bringing to us, to whether there's a protest of a contract and, not getting involved or, and whatnot. So there's a lot that goes into every Board of Public Works meeting.
I think listeners to this podcast, the kind of nerds and people who love this kind of thing, and everybody understands the General Assembly and that process of introducing bills and debating them. You're a veteran of the House of Delegates for a number of years, but everybody's familiar with the legislative process and public hearings and so forth. I think the Board of Public Works is increasingly becoming must-see TV for Maryland policy people. Just like any given meeting, there tend to be, like you said, measured in dollar amounts, it's consequential, but there's so much policy and implementation and like asking of the right kinds of questions and bringing agency leaders before. I recommend it. I think people should go out of their way, and it's easier now, right? You can do it at home through YouTube. It's harder than back in the day. You used to have to drive to Annapolis. And
I also say, because of legislation that we passed when I was on the Appropriations Committee, that agenda for the Board of Public Works is available ahead of time, so you can download it, look at the PDF. We're also really dedicated to making it more transparent. So we worked with the governor and the Legislative Black Caucus this year to pass legislation to create a dashboard so that people can better understand and sort the types of contracts that are coming through the Board of Public Works as well. But you're right. I mean, not every meeting has huge, big front page news, but every once in a while there are very big and consequential items, or even settlements. Today we approved a nearly $3 million settlement for a man who was wrongfully convicted and served 30 years in jail. Recently we approved a settlement for the victims or survivors of sexual abuse at University of Maryland, Baltimore County, UMBC. So much of this, it is real, and this is how our taxes are spent, right? So it's important for people to understand.
Oh, we go out of our way to try and keep our readers. We run the Conduit Street blog, and in advance of every Board of Public Works meeting, we run the agenda. We try and highlight things that would be county specific. A lot of county governments have their program open space projects come through the board for final approval and that sort of thing. And a lot of counties have put multiple years of time and effort into one of those projects. If you're Caroline County, you get a really small allocation. You might save up for 2 or 3 years to be able to do one impactful project. So that's just like one line item or one page in a big binder. But to them, it's a capstone to a ton of work. So anyway, we invest in it, and I think our listeners and followers can as well. And the dashboard, all the better.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, a number of bills that you had this past session. Maybe we can get into that in a little bit. The breadth of work that goes into BPW is, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you do all these things.
It's an enormous amount of work. And it's sort of, people, what happens at the meeting is sort of the tip of the iceberg, right? Exactly. Everything happens in between meetings, right? And so I think the governor, the treasurer, and I, we take the job really seriously. And so our meetings are a lot shorter than they used to be, but that doesn't mean that, we're not doing the same amount or more work and inquiry into what we're doing.
Right. And I think that's user-friendly as well. When you have issues that are relatively ministerial, okay, let's not spend 20 minutes on that item, but let's spend 20 minutes on the item where there's a policy question or where there's a concern or some back and forth. And that's respectful of your stakeholder participation as well, I think. Right?
Exactly.
Right, but a lot of transparency in procurement, and I know that's a big deal. A lot of transparency generally with BPW, and I think that's a really good thing. One of the more very important roles that you and your staff serve is to keep an eye on the economy and the governmental revenues that come from economic activity. Can you talk a little about the revenue estimating process? It's a lot goes into it. It's not an exact science, but talk a little bit about that and how that plays into your role.
Sure. The Bureau of Revenue Estimates is housed within the Office of the Comptroller. And the Bureau of Revenue Estimates reports up to the Board of Revenue Estimates, which confusingly both have the same acronym, the BRE, so you never know what we're talking about. But the Board of Revenue Estimates, which is me, the treasurer, the secretary of DBM, and of course the head of the Bureau, we all, and he reports to us, we are responsible for adopting the revenue estimates for the state. And, Maryland is great because it is a best practice state. We use a consensus revenue forecasting process. So the Bureau of Revenue Estimates presents forecasts to and reaches a consensus with the Revenue Monitoring Committee. This is very in the weeds, but that is a multi-agency committee that has fiscal officers with decades of experience. And then the board, they present then that consensus revenue model to us in the Board of Revenue revenue estimates. That is a public meeting, public documents. Because of legislation I worked on several years ago, the BRE even has its own website.
Which is great, by the way.
Thank you. So you can find all of that information. Then we adopt that forecast. And that forecast is what our budget is built on, right? And it's just really important. I mean, I think we in Maryland take for granted that we adopt a budget and we, forecast a revenue forecast and we use that, but that is not how it is in every state, right? And so it is a best practice. It ensures that we are being fiscally prudent because we are trying to live within our means. And of course, forecasting is difficult and it's not precise. And we do our best, and we are always looking to do better and to do more at the BRE.
I will say, a couple things about Maryland's revenue forecasting process that I've picked up over the years. One is we stand in contrast with an awful lot of other states where the official revenue estimate to which you balance your budget is a politically contentious and sometimes even partisan matter where it's down to the wire and even past the 1st of July. And some states are into September, October, and they're still debating their revenue, like the revenue guess, alongside policy, whether we will expand this program or whether we have to put people onto a waiting list or other such things, debating tax rates and service levels, but debating what's the official forecast on revenue is going to look like in the hands of the same people. It just, there's an analogy that I can't pull together at the moment about foxes and hen houses and things of that nature.
No, I mean, I think, but we take it for granted that this is how we do it, but it is a really big deal and means that, I think it's part of the reason that we have such a strong bond rating. It's part, we have these structures in place to ensure that we are being fiscally prudent. And look, we employ some of the brightest economists that the state has to offer in the Office of the Comptroller, and we are determined to let them do their job, right? And we have to then adopt that and live with it and understand it.
Right. And this has been, I think, the last several years has been probably the most trying window for people in the public sector trying to make good faith guesses for what will next year look like bottom line wise. Just predicting, there are some reliable indicators in the state economy and the national economy. You look at unemployment, you look at like payroll numbers and things like that, and you usually have a pretty decent proxy for what is happening in the underlying economy. And the last few years, 2020 was the huge dip in the roller coaster for a moment, and no one knew what that was going to look like. July 1 of 2020, the Board of Public Works was considering saying we better get ahead of this and make some deep cuts in advance. And then it turned out the American economy was probably propped up by some federal intervention that helped in a lot of ways and kept us from having maybe an economic disaster to go along with a public health disaster. I think it was probably wise in the short term, but it certainly has wreaked havoc for people who do this for a living to try and say what's next year going to look like with even just payrolls and so forth. Before you get to the tricky stuff like guessing the stock market.
No, that's absolutely.
Gains.
And I think that goes to the structure of the state. So the Board of Public Works has the ability to make cuts if it needs to, right? And the BRE, but you're right. I mean, we are still living with the fallout of COVID and of the pandemic and of the fiscal stimulus. And so as we look sort of even just a year or two behind us, sort of numbers went down, but then in capital gains, revenues increased so exponentially, it was unprecedented, right? And then they came down again because people had made their money. And so it's been very volatile, which is really challenging to predict. And also really challenging on the counties, I know, right?
Absolutely.
Because we are bringing in this money and then handing over the distributions, and people are like, wait, where did all this come from? Or like, wait, where's the rest of it? So it can be really challenging.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll take a break here, but we will be right back, and we're going to talk more with Comptroller Brooke Lierman. We'll get into the latest deep dive into the Maryland economy coming right up after the break.
Hello, listeners. This is Chantel Malcolm Lim, podcast producer and communications coordinator here at MACO. I'm here to tell you that MACO is hiring for its policy team. The voices you hear on the podcast, they're all contributors to MACO's work as advocates for county governments and all their frontline services. We are based in Annapolis. We are very, very engaged during the 90-day legislative session and work year-round to support and help our member counties and their elected and professional leaders. This is a role as a government relations professional. You would be researching legislation, testifying before the General Assembly, and working with stakeholders to help counties deliver for their residents back home. If this sounds like it could be you, visit the MACO webpage at mdcounties.org/policy job and apply. Once again, that's mdcounties.org/policy job. It is a great opportunity.
Welcome back to the Conduit Street Podcast. We are talking with Maryland Comptroller Brooke Lierman, and she just got through talking about her role in assessing the state's economy, connecting that to government revenues. And Michael, I think that's probably going to get us into an issue that you have really invested in recently. We have, and I know the comptroller has as well.
Yeah, I thought the timing was great to have the comptroller join us, and we're flattered that she wanted to join us and spend some time on this. But I know you take the duty of looking at the economy and these underlying metrics. You take that really seriously. You put together the first of its kind report of the state of the Maryland economy.
Yep.
So we're familiar with sort of the political state of the state,
right,
but the state of the economy is a little more nuts and bolts.
Yep.
A little more like, let's look under the hood. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people found that fascinating, and you followed it up with another report. So we want to talk about both of them.
Sure.
While we got you here, but maybe start with the state of the economy, what that endeavor looked like and what it's delivering for you and your staff and other stakeholders.
Sure, absolutely. After our first Board of Revenue Estimates meetings last March, we really realized that there were some flashing yellow lights in our economy, and we had not done a good enough job at identifying why. And so, I had conversations with some business leaders. I frankly had conversations with the Fed and some previous U.S. Treasury leaders, and with our BRE and with our new Deputy Comptroller of Policy, Public Works, and Investment. And we said, we've got to do more. We've got to do research. We embarked on a 9-month-long, we had roundtables in all corners of the state with business leaders, economic development leaders. We crunched the numbers internally. And then in January of this year, we issued the first ever State of the Economy report from the Office of the Comptroller. And we briefed legislators on it. We briefed county officials on it, municipal officials, of course, the governor's team, and more. And we thought it was so important because we really needed to understand both what our opportunities and challenges were. And what we found, we did identify some stubborn economic headwinds that have really constrained Maryland's growth, both prior to and coming out of the pandemic. So we saw that we have lost some of our labor force participation, right, which is the percent of people who are working or who are looking for work. That number has decreased since before the pandemic, which has resulted in over 180,000 fewer workers in our economy today than before the pandemic. If we don't have workers, private jobs can't grow. Private sector job growth is constrained. Right. Our GDP is constrained. And so we just don't see the growth that we need to. Some of that losing those workers is also around population. And our population actually decreased during the pandemic for the first time since World War II. Right. So we dug into each of these areas a little bit. We looked at women leaving the workforce. We looked at, we touched on the idea of immigration and what it meant. And so, we talked about the challenges of the opioid epidemic and how that had constrained our labor force. So we touched on a variety of different ideas, and of course, housing costs. Actually, housing costs came up as the number one issue for every business roundtable, which was fascinating. Yep. So a really, I think, important exercise. Not something we'll do every year. Right? It won't change so much that we need to do it every year. But I think an important starting point for us. And then in a few years, we can do another look back at where we are.
And you mentioned you dropped that report in January. That really became a centerpiece to the legislative session. I know that you briefed legislators. It did. I mean, everyone was talking about it. It was so in depth. Thanks. I mean, how do you think that how did it work for you when you were briefing legislators? I'm sure you got a lot of questions, but it really did set the stage for the session. Well,
thanks. Yeah. I mean, I think legislators, and I say this as a former legislator, we want information, right? We want to be doing the right thing, and we have so many time constraints, right? There's so much coming at us all the time. We wanted to put something together that was understandable and that really just got to the point right away. And that's what we tried to do in this report. And I was really grateful to legislators for taking this seriously and to the governor's team for really, looking at it. I mean, the governor mentioned it in his State of the State report when talking about the importance of childcare investment, right? And they cited it in their work on housing and the housing legislation. So, we want to be helpful. We are not, my team is not the team that's going to write the policies and the bills, right? We want to give the information to the policymakers so that then they can determine, oh, this really matters and I have an idea on how to solve this challenge. Or, oh, look at this opportunity. I have a bill that could meet this opportunity. That's the idea.
I think an interesting element of that exercise, as reading through the report, I found is it can be tough to separate what things are national or global trends versus what things may be specific to the demographics here in Maryland or the contours of our workforce or the there's some sort of things where we are an outlier. There's some things where we're clearly just sort of along for the ride. Yeah. Wow, interest rates go up generally. Right. That's much more than Maryland policy. That's
not our fault.
Right. But then that changes housing affordability itself. Right. Yep. So the ingredients in the stew of what's happening in the Maryland economy, some of them are probably direct outcomes of local action. Yep. Some of them we have almost no influence on. And that's an interesting mix, I feel like.
It is an interesting mix. And we get into some of those a little bit. When we're looking at population, for instance, we talked about, there's more domestic migration in the United States since COVID because people can work remotely. And and people are just more mobile now anyways. And so Maryland is a part of that, right? And so we have people moving from higher cost of living states like New York, New Jersey, DC to Maryland. But we also have Marylanders moving to lower cost of living states like the Carolinas and Florida. And so we find ourselves, every other state is in this situation too, right? So we all are struggling with it. We also have, just the natural birth rate is declining, right? And so there are things that we are a part of that everybody else is a part of, and we have to, be a look out for that.
I think those of us in local government also are feeling like we haven't yet seen the full play out of what the change in real estate values is going to look like with that drift. If there is in fact going to be a permanent drift of people saying, hey, now that I've discovered I can work remotely, that's now I'm going to insist on that for my future work opportunities, and I'm going to be at Deep Creek or I'm going to whatever.
I'm going to be in Montana.
Right? So with that sort of change, what's going to happen to downtown assessments that used to have inherent value because, downtown's important just because it's downtown and you have to be there. And if 40% of downtown now feels like they can be at Deep Creek, then what happens there? And I think Baltimore, but our county seats and our built up areas are still waiting to see where that settles. That's a slower process than merely, this one taxpayer picks up and heads to Tennessee. Right?
Well, and you see county governments, I saw the other day, like the Montgomery County Council, working on that to incentivize businesses to lease properties, right? I mean, Montgomery County's been hit really hard. Baltimore City's been hit hard. Our downtown. Look, I'll say maybe this is because I'm a downtown kind of girl. I believe in downtowns. Just throughout history, we have never seen a city or an urban region that had a thriving uptown without a thriving downtown. It's the heart. And so even if who is populating those buildings and what those buildings are being used for changes over the next few years, I do believe that in order to have a successful economy, you need to figure out how to make downtown work. And so, in the office of the comptroller, we are moving 300 employees to downtown Baltimore. We have, where our offices are now at 7 St. Paul Street. So I was there yesterday. It's great. So we're excited. Yep.
So when it comes to labor participation, I know we touched on that, but I think Maryland's around 65%. It's higher than the national average, but we're not where we want to be.
Right.
And I think one of the most concerning aspects of that report was women in the workforce and the challenges there. I know that's really important for you. And so what do you see there? And what are some of the ways we can start to address that and make sure that women have the ability to be in the workforce, that they have childcare, they have all the other necessary things? What do you think about that number, and does it stand out to you?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Look, women are the economy. And so any separation of sort of issues like childcare from how we rebuild our economy are foolish, frankly, because we need people to be working, and we need them to be empowered to be working, and that can't be an economic sacrifice for them. Maryland has the 8th highest childcare costs in the nation. DC has the highest childcare costs in the nation. And this is just, it has to make economic sense, though, for both parents to be working, right? And so the Speaker, the Senate President, the General Assembly has worked hard, as has the Governor, to make sure that they are addressing some of this childcare. So we have this fantastic childcare scholarship program. But it's still really hard for childcare agencies to make it work. Right. And, I'm really hopeful that the blueprint through its, pre-K will help with some of that. But there's a long ways to go to really come up with a long-term solution for some of this. But there's, and I also say women are not a monolith, right? There are many reasons that women are sometimes opting out. And some of them, frankly, are starting their own businesses, but that data hasn't begun to show yet. Whether their businesses are successful will be determined in part by whether they get equitable access to the capital that they need to grow their businesses. Right. So it's really important that we take this seriously. Before the pandemic, under 29% of new businesses were founded by women. During and after the pandemic, half of businesses were started by women. Right. And whether those businesses are successful, though, will mean realigning to make sure that they have access to the loans that they need, to the capital that they need to grow their businesses.
I think it certainly feels like an issue that hasn't found a resting point. Like, we're not at an equilibrium yet.
We are not.
The dials are still spinning.
They are.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're still trying to measure this sort of stuff. I know, just a little callback. We had one of our smaller counties, St. Mary's County, at our winter conference back in December. They talked about like if we do a panel at a MACO conference talking about recruiting and retaining employees and how do you get people to serve in your local correction center or in just about almost any function in the public sector, the room will be filled hoping somebody's got some magic answer. Right. And rarely does anyone. But St. Mary's County said our last initiative was we're opening a childcare facility on our county campus, basically saying, okay, let's find 80 seats for kids and we'll start with the county employees and it'll be right on site. It'll be easy to get over there if you need to and that sort of stuff. And make this like no one thought of it like this way before. Make it an on-site fringe benefit that you're going to come work in this building. Your kid or your kids can be right over there, and you have a clear sense of where they are. You got a reliable provider and so forth, and that's a bundled deal. Got to be thinking sideways like that.
During World War II, when there was a huge workforce shortage, and you couldn't raise wages because of the Wage Control Board, what businesses did to attract workers was created employer-sponsored health care. Right. They gave everybody health care as a fringe benefit, right? I mean, this is the sort of new, what's the next thing that we could be doing? And a big piece of it is childcare, whether you have one on your facility or whether you partner with a private childcare facility to say, hey, we're going to pay for half of it and you'll have a guaranteed spot at this, whatever it is, like there's ways to make this work.
So as we continue to think about the Maryland economy, earlier this month, you followed up the big report by doing a little bit deeper dive into foreign-born Marylanders and their contribution to the economy. Now, I mean, I guess I might preface this for a moment. We get that on the federal level, there's a lot of political back and forth about federal policy on immigration and enforcement and all those sorts of things. And that's interesting. I'm sure there are plenty of folks with their own podcasts who want to get into that side of things.
Not here.
But here, I think there still is an angle that there are ways where the Maryland economy looks different than the national or even our neighboring states with foreign-born workers and their contributions and so forth. So what did you find when you started to do some digging with the immigrants and their effect on the Maryland economy?
Sure, absolutely. And as you said, really, the national discourse on immigration, unfortunately, really centers on unauthorized border crossings. But the vast majority of immigrants come to the United States legally under visas or another lawful non-citizen status. And we have found in Maryland that they are really buoying our economy. I mean, they are integral to the success of Maryland over the long term. So they, as of 2022, immigrants represent 16.7% of Maryland's population. It's a higher than our neighboring states. Right. And they are more likely to participate in the U.S. in the labor force than U.S.-born Marylanders. So that is particularly meaningful right now because we are struggling with a labor shortage. And so as of 2022, immigrants represented 21.1% of the labor force, even though, as I said, they're only 16% of our population. So that is just a really important part of the story of Maryland's economy. And, you know, I think sometimes too, people pigeonhole immigrants in certain professions, but they are across the board in every profession, you know, that you can imagine in the state of Maryland. You know, we saw tragically that sometimes immigrants are overrepresented in more dangerous professions, like those who lost their lives on the Key Bridge in its collapse. But our immigrants are also, you know, filling important STEM jobs, and they're researchers at NIH or up and down the 270 corridor, or, you know, working on quantum issues in College Park, or, you know, working in the healthcare field at Hopkins or Maryland, right? I mean, so they're really in every profession in the state and really just play an essential role in our economy.
Right. And for a state like Maryland that has among the lowest unemployment rates, like the stripe of Marylanders who are out looking for work and can't find an opportunity is very low.
Yes,
I mean, if you take whatever economics courses and they talk about, well, there's always going to be 4% unemployment. There's just friction and things like that cause people to be in transition, and we're at 2.5. So reliably,
sometimes.
but it's not a flash in the pan. We seem to be sticking there for a window. The worker shortage, but for foreign-born Marylanders, would be even more concerning, and that would be driving, you know, shortages like in some of these fields like healthcare, construction, even if they are sort of stereotypical roles, like we've had trouble finding registered nurses, and nurse practitioners and so forth, and in the construction fields. I mean, we've had enough inflation trying to build things as it is. The notion if we were having alarming worker shortages in those areas, it'd be all the worse.
Oh, much worse. And then it ends up costing all of us more, right? So absolutely. You know, I think interesting stat is that in Maryland, there are 3 jobs for every job seeker. Nationally, there's 1.8 jobs for every job seeker. So, you know, we just have a lot more job availability. And also interesting, I think, is that international migration actually prevented Maryland from demonstrating a loss in population in 2023. So, but for international, you know, immigrants moving to Maryland in 2023, we would have yet again had another population loss. So, you know, and we don't get into any of the sort of peripheral benefits of having, you know, an amazing international communities with all the great, you know, diversity and cultural benefits that come along with it. We just talk hardcore economics in this report, but it's all there. And, you know, we also reported the most immigrants living in Maryland are in Montgomery County, in Prince George's County, and in Howard County. And the immigrants' sort of top 5 countries of origin are El Salvador, India, China, Nigeria, and Guatemala. So
literally around the world.
Around the world,
around
the world, yes. So it's really interesting, and you know, there's more to come, I think, which is exciting. So Baltimore City, the Biden administration named Baltimore City an official refugee resettlement center. Global Refuge, an NGO there, is working to prepare to receive Asian and Middle Eastern refugees in the coming years. So, you know, I think this is an important part of our state. It's an important part of our economy, and there's more to come, which is good.
Well, This is exactly what we were hoping to chat about, and I think our listeners are on this channel too. We from time to time, as we've been in the middle of recording an episode, we look at each other. We're like, are we getting too in the weeds or too deep in the that sort of stuff? Too many numbers and so forth. And almost invariably, the listeners come back and say, "That was good. That was good. We want more. We want more about the formulas,
data,
more about the numbers and that sort of thing." So, like in the show notes for this episode, we can link our readers and our followers and our listeners to both of the reports that you've talked through. Let them dig into all that stuff themselves. But I think this is the kind of stuff that the Conduit Street audience is digging.
Yeah, well, that's great. Yeah, and we've created a sort of new webpage to house our reports. We have 2 so far. It's very exciting. More to come with our new policy team. And so MarylandTaxes.gov is, of course, our website, and MarylandTaxes.gov/research is where you can find our reports. And another time, I'd love to come back and we talk all about our modernization efforts in the Office of the Comptroller. We are joining the 21st century. It is very exciting.
I was just going to say the new tax portal. You're cracking down on fraud massively. You're using new technology. All of that is really good to see, and I know people are really excited about it. So I'd love to have you back to talk more about that for sure. But I guess we will leave it there for today. And again, a very interesting and enlightening report. Both of the reports that we talked about. We will link everything on our blog show notes to the website for the Comptroller. And Madam Comptroller, we're so glad to have you join us. We covered a lot of ground. Thank you so much. And we will have you back to talk about all the other things you are doing, which again, I have no idea how you do them. I think there must be 10 of you. But you mentioned all the boards you're on. Literally, you are on a lot of boards and commissions. And So we really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Great to be here. Thank you so much for your work and for your partnership.
Okay, so for Madam Comptroller Brooke Lierman, for Michael Sanderson, and for our producer, Chantel Malcolm Lim, Kevin Kinnally signing off, and we will talk to you soon.